I had barely merged onto Highway 71 when Maria called me, crying so hard she could barely breathe. "Ma'am," she whispered, "don't go home. Pull over and check the cameras." My hands tightened around the steering wheel. I asked what had happened, but she only repeated, "Please, just look." There are moments when your body recognizes danger before your mind can name it. Mine did then. I took the next exit and pulled into the parking lot of a closed barbecue place beneath a faded sign advertising brisket by the pound. Less than 20 minutes earlier, I had watched my in-laws enter Austin-Bergstrom International Airport with matching blue suitcases. Judith and Harold were supposedly flying to Seattle before an Alaskan cruise. Judith had hugged me longer than usual and told me to take care of myself. I thought she was being kind. I was 44, a United States Army captain stationed at Fort Cavazos, with 22 years of experience, staying calm through convoy delays, missing equipment, and soldiers calling home with bad news. Yet in that parking lot, I felt unable to breathe. I opened the security app. The front porch camera showed nothing. The kitchen was empty. Then I tapped the living room feed. My husband was standing beside the couch with his hands around another woman's waist. Daniel kissed her slowly and comfortably, like this had happened many times before. She was wearing my cream cardigan, the one I kept folded in the hallway closet because our house was always too cold. A half-empty bottle of wine sat on the coffee table. Daniel had opened the good Cabernet my battalion commander had given me after our last inspection. For several seconds, I watched the woman laugh and touch Daniel's face while he smiled at her, in a way he had not smiled at me in years. My phone nearly slipped to the floorboard. Maria said she was hiding in the laundry room after returning for her blood pressure pills, hearing voices, and assuming I had come home early. I told her to leave through the garage with only her purse. When she apologized, I reminded her this was not her fault. Somehow, my voice stayed steady. I saved the video to my phone and emailed myself a copy. Training took over. Preserve the evidence, confirm the facts, and do not rush into danger. As I reached for the ignition, a blue suitcase rolled into the living room feed, the same one Judith had carried through the airport doors. Then Judith stepped into my house laughing. I told myself it might be an old recording, a glitch, or exhaustion. The timestamp ended that hope. 11:47 a.m. Live. Judith set the suitcase beside the couch. Daniel put an arm around her shoulders. She joked that she had expected me to insist on walking them all the way to security. The other woman laughed. Daniel shrugged and said, "She never questions family." My stomach dropped, not because of the affair anymore, but because all three of them were laughing together. This was not a secret relationship Daniel had desperately tried to hide. His parents knew. Maybe they had always known. I kept watching. The army had taught me that panic makes people careless, while patience reveals the battlefield. Judith asked whether Maria had left. Daniel thought so because she had cleaned that morning. The other woman worried Maria had seen her, but Daniel dismissed her as 61 and oblivious. I almost laughed because Maria had probably noticed more about my marriage than I had. When I called again, Maria whispered that she was driving and said she should have warned me sooner. After a long silence, she admitted seeing the woman perhaps 6 times. 6 visits meant a routine, not one mistake. She had never witnessed anything openly inappropriate because Daniel always called her a client. Today changed everything. Judith hugged the woman without an introduction. They already knew each other. Judith had not discovered the affair by accident. She had welcomed it. I replayed the footage and studied the room. 3 coffee cups and a fresh Shipley Donuts box. The morning was planned. On the driveway feed, a black SUV arrived at 11:39 a.m. Judith and Harold stepped out. Harold opened the trunk, revealing only 2 small carry-ons for a supposed 2-week cruise. The large blue suitcase was empty, nothing but a prop. They had never intended to leave Texas. I zoomed in until the picture blurred. Harold shook Daniel's hand and hugged the woman like family. 3 months earlier, Judith had canceled Sunday dinner for a supposed weekend in Waco, while Daniel skipped church for an important client meeting. Had they all been together? How many holidays, birthdays, and silences had been staged around me? Daniel texted, "Hope your drive back is safe. Love you." I replied, Just left Austin. See you tonight." On the live feed, he smiled as he sent, "Sounds good," then kissed the woman again. Seconds later, Judith carried in a thick manila envelope labeled in black marker, "Attorney." I sat there another 10 minutes as the July sun beat against the windshield. A retired couple climbed into an RV, and a father helped his granddaughter into a pickup. Normal life continued while mine collapsed. I called my battalion executive officer, reported a family emergency, and asked to attend the briefing remotely. He reminded me I had never asked for special treatment and told me to huey my family. Then I called Linda Brooks, a divorce attorney recommended by a fellow officer after a difficult custody battle. Her receptionist said Linda was booked all afternoon. I said it was urgent. When she asked what kind of urgent, I looked at the camera feed and answered, "My husband doesn't know I've discovered something." 30 seconds later, I had an appointment for 2 o'clock. I drove to Linda's Austin office, overlooking Lady Bird Lake. She was in her early 60s, calm and composed, with the confidence of someone who had seen every kind of divorce. She watched silently. Daniel's kiss did not move her, nor did Judith's entrance. But when the manila envelope appeared, she leaned forward. I enlarged the blurred image until the word remained barely readable. "Attorney." Linda said, "They're organized." She did not mean the affair. She meant their plan. The cheating mattered, but the preparation mattered more. She handed me a yellow legal pad and told me to think like an investigator, not a wife. We built a timeline. Daniel's late nights, the missing paper statements, and Judith's sudden interest in our financial records. 6 months earlier, Daniel had pushed paperless billing to reduce clutter. Around then, Judith offered to store our house papers in her fireproof safe because older homes could have electrical fires. What once sounded thoughtful now sounded calculated. Linda circled both events and ordered me not to confront anyone. "They expected anger," she said. "They would not expect a patient woman gathering evidence." Driving toward Killeen, I stopped at Buc-ee's, where I normally wandered the aisles buying jerky or pecan pralines for my soldiers. That afternoon, I barely tasted the coffee. Daniel called cheerfully, asked about dinner, and claimed his parents had just landed early. He never hesitated. I checked the footage again. At 11:39, my in-laws entered my house. At 11:52, Daniel texted that they were boarding. 2 hours later, he claimed they had landed in Seattle. 3 impossible stories from one confident liar. What else had he hidden? That evening, I opened our joint investment account and found my answer. Exactly $186,247.18 was gone, transferred in smaller amounts over 8 months, $10,000 here, $15,000 there, $25,000 after Christmas. Each move was disguised as a portfolio adjustment or asset reallocation. Without suspicion, I might never have noticed. I captured every page, then sat at the kitchen table listening to Daniel hum in the shower. An hour earlier, he had kissed my forehead and offered grilled salmon for dinner. I had smiled and agreed, though the words tasted like cardboard. After 18 years, I wondered whether I had ever known him. The next morning, before reporting to Fort Cavazos, I returned to Linda's office. A legal assistant waited with a checklist. Linda said we would collect facts and let feelings wait. For nearly 3 hours, we searched checking, savings, retirement, brokerage, and the college fund for our niece's nursing school. Daniel had always handled the finances, and I had trusted him completely. Linda said that was common and did not judge me. Then she turned her screen toward me. A search of Bell County property records showed 3 properties connected to Daniel: our home, a small rental house, and a lake cabin outside Burnett. I told her we did not own a cabin. She pointed to the ownership history. Daniel had owned it until 6 weeks earlier, when he transferred it to Judith for $1. I laughed because the number was so absurd. People did not sell lake houses for $1. Linda said, "No, they hide them." That afternoon, I met Maria at a cafe in Harker Heights. Exhausted, she wondered whether she should have warned me months earlier. I told her she spoke when she truly knew. Suspicion was not certainty. She said she had worked for our family for 10 years. I corrected her. "You worked for me." Her eyes filled as she said she could not betray me. I told her she had not, for the first time in 2 days. I felt gratitude instead of anger. Without Maria, I would still be living inside Daniel's illusion. Life on base continued as though nothing had changed. There were morning formations, staff meetings, readiness reports, fuel inventories, and maintenance schedules. One afternoon, a young lieutenant complained that a supply shipment would arrive 2 hours late. I remember thinking how strange life was. One part of my world was collapsing while the other expected me to discuss logistics. Yet the routine became comforting. The Army did not care about the state of my marriage. It expected me to do my job, and I still could. That Friday evening, Linda called with good news and bad news. The bad news was that Daniel intended to file for divorce. The good news was that he had already chosen the timing. He did not plan to serve me immediately. He was waiting until after my 6-week training deployment to Fort Irwin the next month. The logic was obvious. He wanted me hundreds of miles away while he emptied the house and rearranged whatever remained. He believed distance and duty would leave me too overwhelmed to fight back. Linda said softly that she did not think he realized I had already changed the game. Neither did I, but I intended to. For 2 weeks, I lived 2 lives. At home, I smiled through dinner, folded laundry beside Daniel, listened to complaints about traffic, clients, and the heat, and watched old Blue Bloods episodes. Sometimes he held my hand, and I let him. Not from forgiveness, but to preserve the illusion. By day, Linda and I assembled receipts, property records, transfers, messages, and lies, like a 1,000-piece puzzle without the box. One Thursday afternoon, while I ate lunch outside headquarters at Fort Cavazos, Linda called and said she had found what they were really hiding. It was worse than the affair. By the time I reached her office, several folders covered the conference table. She handed me a sworn statement Daniel had filed months earlier while refinancing a business loan. Halfway down the second page, I found the sentence, "My wife is frequently absent due to military obligations and has effectively abandoned the marital relationship." I stared at it. I had never abandoned him. I had deployed twice in 18 years, and neither deployment lasted more than 9 months. Yet Daniel claimed he managed the household alone. He said I had chosen the Army over my family. He said he had expected the marriage to end years earlier. None of it was true. My eyes burned, not because I wanted to cry, but because I finally understood how long he had been rewriting our story. That evening, I drove to our church in Killeen, not for a service, but simply to sit in silence. Pastor Allen crossed the fellowship hall and asked whether everything was all right. I almost said yes. Instead, I asked whether Daniel had ever spoken to him about our marriage. Pastor Allen hesitated, then admitted that Daniel had said military life had changed me, that I was never home, and that the church should pray for me to find my way back to my family. Those words hurt more than I expected. People I respected had been praying for a problem that did not exist. Daniel had not only lied to me, he had lied about me. The next morning, Linda connected more of the missing money to the lake cabin. Over $140,000 from our investment account had paid for renovations, including a new dock, a remodeled kitchen, and custom furniture. Every invoice was dated before Daniel transferred ownership to Judith. I had helped pay for a house that was no longer legally ours. Anger nearly overcame me. I wanted to drive home, throw his clothes onto the lawn, and demand answers. Instead, I remembered something an old first sergeant once told me during a field exercise. Never move before you understand the whole battlefield. He had not been talking about marriage, but the advice still fit. That weekend, Daniel suggested we host a family barbecue after Judith and Harold returned from their vacation. The word almost made me laugh. I said it sounded nice. He told me they had missed me and added that his mother thought I had been distant lately. I looked directly into his eyes and asked, "Has she?" He nodded without the slightest sign of guilt, kissed my forehead, and walked into the kitchen. A minute later, Linda texted, "We found someone willing to talk, and it's not who you think." The person who would change everything was not Daniel's accountant. It was the woman he had been risking our marriage for. I expected Daniel's mistress to slam the door in my face. Instead, when I called her, she answered with one exhausted sentence. "I've been wondering when you'd find me." Her name was Emily Carter. She was 38, worked as a pharmaceutical sales representative out of Waco, and sounded nothing like the woman I had imagined. She sounded tired. Linda arranged for us to meet in her office so neither of us would feel ambushed. When Emily entered, she looked nervous enough to turn around and leave. She stopped a few feet from me and said, "I'm sorry." There was no speech and no excuse, only those two words. I asked her to sit. After a long silence, she said, "I didn't know." I reminded her that she knew Daniel was married. Her eyes filled with tears as she explained that she did not know he was still my husband. He had told her our divorce had been finalized the previous winter. Emily took printed emails from her purse and placed them on the table. Daniel had claimed that I refused to sign the final papers, that I had moved onto the base permanently, and that we had not shared a bedroom in more than 3 years. He had even explained his wedding ring by saying removing it would create problems with clients. A short laugh escaped me. The first real laugh I had managed in weeks. Emily gave a weak smile and admitted how ridiculous it sounded now. I told her it sounded exactly like something Daniel would say. Linda spent the next hour asking careful questions. The relationship had begun about 11 months earlier. Emily had met Daniel's parents several times. He had introduced her as the woman he would marry after the divorce, and Judith and Harold had encouraged the relationship. Then Emily said they had invited her to Thanksgiving. I slowly lifted my head. I had spent 4 days at Fort Bliss coordinating emergency logistics after severe flooding in West Texas. Daniel had told me his parents wanted a quiet holiday because everyone was tired. In reality, they had celebrated with her. As painful as the conversation was, I stopped seeing Emily as my enemy. She had believed a different collection of lies than I had. We were not competing. We had both been manipulated by the same man. Linda asked whether she would testify if the case went to court. Emily stared out the window toward Lady Bird Lake, then said yes. When Linda asked why, Emily folded her hands and said that the day before, she had discovered Daniel had proposed to another woman. Linda and I both looked up. Emily gave a bitter laugh. Apparently, neither of us had been the only one. Daniel had been juggling 3 women, and none of us knew about the others. Linda had practiced divorce law for 32 years, and she said she had never seen anyone destroy his own case so completely. A month earlier, I would never have imagined sitting with my husband's mistress, sharing coffee and comparing evidence. Life has a strange sense of humor. By early August, Linda had scheduled Daniel's deposition. It was not a trial, but every answer would be sworn, and every lie would matter. Linda told me to say as little as possible. She knew I could do that, which was why she was counting on me. The deposition took place in a plain conference room in downtown Austin. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead while a court reporter waited at her stenotype machine. Daniel arrived wearing his favorite Navy sport coat, the one I had bought for our 15th anniversary. He smiled as though we were meeting for lunch. He told me I looked good. I replied that I had been sleeping better. That surprised him for a second, but then his smile returned. His attorney began with routine questions about our marriage, jobs, income, and property. Daniel answered smoothly, as if he had rehearsed every line. Then Linda asked when his relationship with Emily Carter had begun. He said he did not know anyone by that name. Linda placed a color photograph on the table showing Daniel and Emily holding hands at the farmer's market in Georgetown 10 months earlier. He called her a business acquaintance. Linda added another photograph from a steakhouse in Round Rock, another from a weekend at Lake Travis, and another of him kissing Emily outside a hotel. His attorney rubbed his forehead. Daniel shifted and admitted he might have socialized with her. Linda asked whether he had told Emily our divorce was final. He denied it. Without argument, Linda pressed a button on a small speaker. Emily's recorded voice said Daniel had told her the divorce was finished before Christmas. Then Daniel's own voice answered that he knew and simply had not removed his ring. The room went silent. His attorney slowly closed his legal pad. Linda moved to the cabin. Daniel admitted transferring the Burnett County property to his mother for $1 and called it a gift. When asked whether marital money had funded the renovations, he said he did not recall. Linda handed him 6 invoices, totaling more than $140,000, each carrying his electronic signature. Again, he said he did not recall. The court reporter never looked up. She kept typing. Then Linda asked how many romantic relationships he had been involved in during the previous year. Daniel sighed dramatically and said his private life was irrelevant. Linda told him it was relevant that day. He glanced at me, then at his attorney, and finally answered, 1. At that exact moment, the conference room door opened and Emily walked in. Daniel's face turned white. She calmly explained that she had been asked to wait outside. Then she looked at him and asked, "Which one of us were you planning to marry?" Daniel opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Emily reminded him that he had said I was gone. She apologized to me, then turned back to him and said she had learned the week before that he had proposed to another woman in Dallas. His attorney dropped his pen. Even the court reporter paused. Daniel whispered, "I," and stopped. For the first time since the nightmare began, the man who always had an explanation had run out of lies. The divorce hearing was scheduled for a Wednesday morning in early September at the Bell County Courthouse in Belton. I woke before dawn as I always did on duty days. For a few minutes, I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the quiet house. It was probably the last morning Daniel and I would ever spend under the same roof. I did not want him to stay, but I had never imagined 18 years of marriage ending in a courtroom. I put on my Army service uniform with the same care I used before promotion ceremonies. Every ribbon, button, and crease was exact. I was not trying to impress anyone. That uniform represented the integrity Daniel had spent months trying to undermine. Outside the courthouse, Linda asked whether I was ready. I told her I was as ready as I would ever be. She reminded me that I did not need to win every argument. I only needed to tell the truth. Daniel was already seated beside his attorney when we entered. He looked confident, almost relaxed. Judith and Harold sat behind him. Judith refused to look at me. Harold gave a brief nod, then lowered his eyes. I could not tell whether he felt ashamed or merely defeated. Judge Eleanor Watkins entered at exactly 9 o'clock. She had silver hair, reading glasses low on her nose, and the calm voice of someone who had spent decades listening to people explain why their bad choices were never their fault. After the procedural matters, Linda called Maria as the first witness. Maria looked terrified. The judge spoke kindly and told her to take her time. Maria described returning to the house for her medication, hearing voices, and seeing Daniel kiss another woman. She never exaggerated and never guessed. She answered only what she knew. When Daniel's attorney suggested she might have misunderstood, Maria replied quietly, "I cleaned that house every week for 10 years. I know the difference between greeting someone and kissing them." A few people smiled and even the judge's expression softened. Emily testified next. She admitted the affair without trying to excuse herself. She said she had made mistakes and believed a man who lied to both of us. Linda introduced text messages, emails, photographs, and financial records. Each piece fit into the same story. Daniel grew quieter with every exhibit. Then Linda asked permission to show the home security footage. The courtroom lights dimmed. On the large monitor, everyone watched Daniel put his arms around Emily in my living room. The next clip showed Judith entering, smiling and laughing, then handing Daniel the envelope marked attorney. Another showed Harold carrying boxes from our garage to his truck over several weekends. Bank records tied those weekends to the property transfers. The evidence was not theatrical. It was methodical, and that made it more powerful. Daniel finally took the stand. His attorney asked whether the financial decisions had been made in good faith and whether he had intended to hurt me. Daniel answered yes to the first question and no to the second. Then Linda stood for cross-examination. She held up his phone records and asked why he had texted me that his parents had safely landed in Seattle, while the security footage showed all 3 of them eating takeout in my dining room. The courtroom became so quiet that I could hear the air conditioning. Daniel looked at his attorney, his parents, and finally me. There was nowhere left to hide. Judge Watkins did not announce her ruling that morning. She recessed for lunch and said she would return at 1:30. Those 2 hours felt longer than the previous 2 months. Linda and I crossed the street to the gin at Nolan Creek, A small diner where I had eaten once after a military ceremony. I could not remember the food. The waitress brought sweet tea and asked whether we wanted the specials. Linda said we were still deciding. After the waitress left, Linda asked how I was holding up. I stared out the window and admitted I had expected to feel furious, but mostly I felt tired. She said that was more common than I realized. In that moment, I understood that revenge had quietly stopped being my goal. I did not need Daniel to suffer. I needed the truth to matter. Those were not the same thing. When court resumed, every gallery seat was occupied. Word had spread that this was not an ordinary divorce. Judge Watkins adjusted her glasses and opened a thick folder. She said the testimony, financial records, electronic communications, and video evidence showed overwhelming proof that Daniel had concealed marital assets, misrepresented financial information, and transferred jointly owned property in anticipation of divorce. Daniel lowered his head. His attorney closed his eyes. The judge declared the transfer of the Burnett County cabin to Judith for $1 a fraudulent conveyance. Judith gasped, but the judge did not look up. Ownership would immediately return to the marital estate until final distribution. The ruling continued for nearly 20 minutes. Every hidden transaction and unexplained transfer was addressed. Daniel was ordered to reimburse the missing investment funds, including the money used to renovate the cabin. I received the marital home in Killeen. Daniel could keep his financial planning business only after paying a substantial equalization settlement. Because of his misconduct during discovery, he was also ordered to cover most of the legal fees. Then Judge Watkins looked directly at him. She said marriages sometimes failed, but dishonesty had turned this case into something far more serious. No one spoke, not even Daniel. Outside, the Texas heat hit like an oven. Daniel hurried toward the parking lot without saying a word. Judith called after him, but he kept walking. Harold remained behind. I almost left, then waited as he approached. He said he owed me an apology and should have stopped everything. He had told himself it was not his business, but it became his business the day he stayed silent. I believed he meant it, although some apologies arrive too late to repair what has been broken. I told him I hoped he found peace. He said he hoped the same for me, then walked away. Before Linda and I reached the parking garage, I stopped and told her I wanted to do something. I wanted to pay off Maria's mortgage. Linda laughed and said she had expected something like that from me. Maria had spent 10 years helping care for my home. When my world collapsed, she chose courage over comfort. No court order could repay that, but kindness might come close. As I started my truck, my phone buzzed. It was not Daniel or Judith. It was Maria asking how everything had gone. I smiled and typed 4 words. The truth won today. 6 months later, I was driving back to Austin-Bergstrom International Airport. The morning looked almost identical to the one that had changed everything. The same Highway 71, the same rolling Texas hills, and even the same radio station playing old country songs. This time, I was not rushing anywhere. I was picking up my younger sister Claire, who was flying in from North Carolina for Thanksgiving. As I entered the arrivals lane, I noticed my hands were no longer shaking. The airport no longer represented betrayal. It represented survival. My life had settled into a new rhythm. I was still serving at Fort Cavazos, and I had recently accepted a promotion that came with more responsibility and a small office overlooking the motor pool. The work kept me busy, and the soldiers kept me grounded. Every morning still began with coffee before sunrise, physical training, a briefing, and paperwork that seemed to multiply overnight. It was not glamorous, but it was honest. After everything that had happened, honesty felt like a gift. Maria still worked for me, although both of us would probably say she was family now. The day after the divorce became final, I gave her an envelope containing proof that her mortgage had been paid in full. She began crying before she finished reading. I reminded her that she had spent 10 years taking care of my home. She insisted she had only done what anyone should do. I told her no. She had done what many people were afraid to do. She had told the truth. She hugged me so tightly I thought we might fall over. To this day, she still brings homemade tamales every Christmas Eve. I pretend to argue, and she ignores me. Some traditions deserve to survive. As for Daniel, I stopped checking on his life. Not because I forgave him, but because I no longer needed to know. Mutual friends mentioned that his financial planning business lost several longtime clients after the divorce became public. The lake cabin was sold, and he moved into a small apartment outside Temple. Whether he eventually found happiness, I honestly do not know. For the first time in a long while, I realized I did not care. That was not bitterness, it was freedom. One Saturday each month, I began volunteering with a support group for military spouses going through divorce. I never stood at the front, pretending to have every answer. I simply told my story. Sometimes we laughed, sometimes we cried. Sometimes we sat in comfortable silence because everyone understood without explanation. After one meeting, a woman about my age stayed behind and asked how I had stopped wanting revenge. I thought for a moment and told her I had not stopped. I had simply realized revenge was not what I truly wanted. When she asked what I wanted instead, I answered, the truth. Once the truth had a chance to speak for itself, I no longer had to carry the anger. She nodded slowly, and I think she understood. Then I saw Claire come through the terminal doors, dragging her suitcase and waving both arms the way she had since we were children. I laughed and waved back. Life was not perfect, and it never would be, but it was peaceful. Looking back, I understand something I could not see that day in the barbecue parking lot when Maria told me to check the cameras. The video did not destroy my life. It revealed the truth before I lost even more years to a lie. Sometimes the hardest moments become the ones that quietly set us free. If the truth has ever changed the direction of your life, I would love to hear your story. Thank you for spending this time with me. Until next time, take care of yourself, and never underestimate the quiet strength that comes from choosing honesty over anger.